being as the sugar pill is a placebo effect, price margin of your placebo effect that you'd be paying for rendered by Stockholm Syndrome. Because the grain in wood is different than the grain of sand, and the difference of that constitutes of a rock, unless the wood is fossilized, but that's one and the same. If the whole earth was combated with lava, it would be a giant fossilized whatever the makeup of the most popular grain were between the two. There's proofs and principles, and the equivalence principle and the uncertainty principle can both be a vector of one array and contortion. A vector of one array and contortion is very well defined if a rock and a planet. Digestion tract would be one thing for sure, or if it were induced in a different way, such as airborne pathogen, where you could have some like taste of cinnamon that you accidentally breathe in as you're drinking a drink with cinnamon on top of it. It would be just as equal to taking a half of a bite of a cinnamon stick if you breathe in really strong cinnamon as you're drinking the drink, and the drink added to the cholestation of the digestion tract, which you had gone inside by drinking the drink. Especially if you can define dark matter and dark energy as just dots or circles or lines. How terrible would that be if sound was a way that you could get copyright infringement, and that if you owned enough sound, then you could tax anyone for using the sound of water like a faucet made. I had two favorite things when I was on a computer as a child, and it wasn't the internet or social media. It was Mathbusters and Zumbinis, and I didn't even like them that well, but nowadays it's starting to turn in the opposite direction, as if the internet and social media are losing advance when freedoms are being taken, such as a sound of a faucet that could have been used as a copyright strike in order to make me not use a computer. But that aside, with freedoms of liberties, to make sure there's no problems or issues that solve problems, to be succinctly, you have to understand how like a head and a bottom is like a Zumbini, and it can have different parts, and there's only like 8 parts in either, and that's just like a dragon and an egg. If you connected both of them, it's like its entire life. But if it grew like 8 heads and it had an egg at the bottom, you could also make that connection equally, because you just draw them together if time didn't mean anything. And if freedom is a vector of time, then that constitutes for something, which allows you to draw 8 dragon heads coming out of an egg and not knowing if it is complete or incomplete, because that's besides the point of the picture. When there's proofs, like any of the apple that the witch did in the Snow White, that could be a proof that was inside of the entire map the whole time, and it was just a bad egg. So succinctly, in Hansel and Gretel, they spread out the breadcrumbs and then they blew away. So succinctly, those could be the same breadcrumbs that were grinded up by the Jack and the Beanstalk's giant bones to make bread. But then the bones would be cobblestones of like the Wizard of Oz's yellow bricks. And so the breadcrumbs and the yellow bricks are succinctly there, but you don't know if it's all just one brick road, because you have to follow it the whole time. You're not born a pagan, and it's a choice. And in the Bible, it just disses them the whole time, because ostensibly they think that everything is because the planets are in alignment. but technically, from a standpoint of their position, Earth wouldn't be orbiting the sun if the planets weren't alive, and then the plants wouldn't be able to be alive, and then we wouldn't be here. So maybe Pagan would be right to say, if the planets weren't aligned and Earth lost its axis, we'd all be. How egregious should suits be if you're suing something for copyright infringement, given that 2 colors of Marlboro are the same as the 2 colors of Coca-Cola? Imagine if you owned a thing called Auto Infuse and it directed everything in an algorithm, so you could allocate anything that had a collapsing wave function would constitute a crystalline structure, and from there you would own the geometrics of, if you turn the entire Earth as a rock into a swamp, anything that was solid from liquid or exchanging in between the two, if you would heat it up or turn whatever and make it turn from a solid to a liquid or vice versa, that would be a crystalline structure that you could own a geometry of if you had that landscaping as an open source binary would allow for it to be given a crystalline structure, a component. If you own two compactance plates that constituted for essentially the difference of a Earth from a rock to a swamp. How egregious should suits be if you're suing something for copyright infringement, given that 2 colors of Marlboro are the same as the 2 colors of Coca-Cola? Imagine if you owned a thing called Auto Infuse and it directed everything in an algorithm, so you could allocate anything that had a collapsing wave function would constitute a crystalline structure, and from there you would own the geometrics of, if you turn the entire Earth as a rock into a swamp, anything that was solid from liquid or exchanging in between the two, if you would heat it up or turn whatever and make it turn from a solid to a liquid or vice versa, that would be a crystalline structure that you could own a geometry of if you had that landscaping as an open source binary would allow for it to be given a crystalline structure, a component. If you own two compactance plates that constituted for essentially the difference of a Earth from a rock to a swamp. When there's proofs like any of the apple that the witch did in the Snow White, that could be a proof that was inside of the entire map the whole time, and it was just a bad egg. I like rephrase it to lightning in a bottle. And the Power Rangers, whenever they go inside of their Megazord, they're enacting their body motions inside of the robot and having it do fantastic attributes in combat with other monsters. And perhaps there would be no monsters if there wasn't a Skull Island with King Kong. So the fact that there was like these one people and they got lost, that attunes to any people who get lost and they find a Skull Island just before, they get capsized or taken out, and that's what happens. And maybe that's how all the monsters are coming about, and then Power Rangers form. So you can have that as a weapon, their Megazord, and then the Megazord has ammo. The ammo would be like a bullet. If you were inside of a capsule, like a giant closet and it was metal, almost like a space capsule when you're going in outer space and you're inside like a small canister. If you ever go in outer space and you're in a small canister, well then that would be just as though if you and whoever else were in there we're enacting as lightning in a bottle, but instead of lightning in a bottle, it's you inside of that. And if that was shot, all your motions of what you're doing would be used as ammo and discharge if it was being discharged from a robot shooting at ammo. So the ammo is like X. X is a value of what you can put inside of a function. And so a function is like a weapon, and a value X is like ammo. And in order to have both, that's like having the land and your body not being used against you or manipulated in any sort of way. And that's kind of hard to say because of the phrasing, you are what you eat. And then that gets into a whole line of reasoning that there's free will. And then that's what most scientists are embattled with and are stopping at nothing to find out the answers to.